everybody. Welcome to this Fellsway Group Digital Resilience Series. Very pleased to announce that we've got Carson Kraus as our guest speaker today. Carson, welcome to the series.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So, Carson, for our audience and the people that are subscribing to the series, a little background on yourself, please.
Sure, I would be happy to do that. So, I had the privilege in the past to work with a lot of great companies, starting with, more on the software side, working for SAP, and then working with a lot of great consumer products, food and beverage companies like Anheuser-Busch, Keurig, and also had dipped my toes in supply chain. Also had the privilege to lead different IT teams, from enterprise architecture to business intelligence to cybersecurity as CISO and IT operations. So, and I'm leveraging that right now. Actually, also a published author at the National CIO Review, where I have a couple articles published about pandemic, COVID-19 recovery and some of the strategies that companies can put into place. So I look forward to talking to you about some of these topics.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks. It's an interesting background. Obviously, we've known each other for some time here. So really appreciate you joining and lending that perspective. So we talked a little bit about earlier, we're in the middle of this pandemic. Don't know how long it lasts. Obviously, there's some discussion about states and economic recovery elements going on. But from our standpoint, I really want to dig into the risk management. And we are in the middle of this. I think there's definitely some lessons to be learned. And more importantly, I think how can we take those lessons to improve the overall resilience of our organizations moving forward from a financial, operational, and reputational perspective. But given your background and some of the publishings that you've had, is there one thing that stands out where, if we rewind the clock to 6, 8, 10 months ago, that maybe people could have done or been better prepared for kind of what we're facing today?
Right. I think there's actually multiple aspects. If we would rank them, I think one of the first exposures that companies had was supply chain. Knowing your supply chain, knowing where your products are coming from, and being able to proactively plan for that. As part of an overall risk management program. What are the risks that you're exposed to? So I think that first topic that came up was supply chain disruption, where you couldn't get your product, you couldn't serve your clients, and it went on from there.
Great. So supply chain is something that you felt more from a business continuity, or just to understand the impact or the knock-on effect of the dependence on that supply chain. Is there something specific where?
Yeah, I think it's just the first piece to the puzzle that started, got things rolling, and then obviously had ripple effects throughout the supply chain, where it impacted the manufacturers and the suppliers in China and the Wuhan area, and then ultimately it rippled to all the other countries that were relying on getting product from them, and then it impacted the stores that couldn't staff the shelves, and it impacted consumers, right? So that was kind of the ripple effect that started there. And if I look at it from a people, process, technology perspective, that's certainly something more from a process perspective. Right. But there's also technology where I think another mistake that I see companies making. Some companies do it less, but really looking at the future and leveraging technology as a differentiator. So help many companies to drive leverage technology and really set themselves apart doing that, and proactively investing in things with the future in mind. So specifically in the pandemic, we could now see that it was more reactive for many organizations, that they had to deploy a remote working model and put that into place. And there have been discussions about bring your own device methodologies and being able to work more flexibly and flexible hours from home. And I think these are things right now on the positive side that companies are experiencing right now, and they start to see, hey, technology is really a differentiator, and it's going to be a differentiator coming out of the recession and into the recovery, right? And companies that invest in technology will set themselves apart.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's an element of this pandemic that is forced digital transformation, if you will, right? To call it
Right.
transformation, it's
You got it. Yeah.
Maybe it can be, maybe it's not, maybe it's just digital updating, modernizing, whatever the buzzword is. I think you're right. I think a lot of organizations were flat-footed by not understanding the business requirements to then update or refine or modernize or transform their digital business processes, but also their ability to be resilient. And none of us could have forecasted this pandemic and how long it is, maybe the infectious disease folks. But I think now, to your point, what we're seeing is the folks that had the foresight to be very good at business continuity and business planning and stay diligent to those hygiene elements are in a vastly better position because they knew they had the muscle memory. They could call on some of those exercises and things of that. But some of the other organizations that I think we're really seeing respond better are the ones that you just articulated that had thought through their digitization, if you will, or their digital transformation, where they've moved to SaaS, they've moved certain applications, they've looked at their processes and their people to ensure that they had the right technologies to support it. And I think that's really critical moving forward. So any anecdotal examples of maybe what people can do? We're in this react phase, right? The 4 phases of crisis management, preparation's out the window. I still think many organizations are still within that react phase where they're buying licenses and adjusting to the work from home or this remote workforce. At the same time as they're trying to really respond to make sure that those discussions or decisions have the lens on resiliency moving forward. So any comments in regards to what can people do in this today that will prepare them better for the future?
Right. Yeah, I think there's many things that you can do today, and I think it's really a shift in mindset where in some ways it might sound strange, but a recession is or a pandemic is really an opportunity in wolf's clothing, right? Where you think it's something bad, but you also can take advantage of some of the things that are happening right now, where there is an openness to invest in technology. You have a lot of great resources that are available right now in the marketplace, and you can really look at strategically. Obviously, you want to contain the costs right now. Contain the cash, leverage automation. The companies right now are investing into robotics and automation, and there will be changes going forward for the workforce that have to retrain and on different skills when they re-enter the job market. But there's also opportunities of different models, right? A lot of companies are embracing this right now. For example, getting critical product, critical medical supply, to hospitals, getting groceries delivered using the touchless deliveries, and even companies that you don't think of, like a company called Drizzly in the alcoholic beverage industry, enables liquor stores to become SaaS companies. They charge them a software as a service fee, and they're becoming software companies now, right? And the consumer wins. They don't charge them anything on top of that. So I think that's a great model of how you can really look at differentiating yourselves, looking at what your competition is doing, and doing little trials, proof of concepts, cheap, quick tries, trying out different business capabilities or things that you think your consumers and clients would like. And even from a pricing perspective, right? McDonald's has the $1 menu. So yeah, do you have a service that you could offer for cheap, or to try, or pay as you go? I think right now is a good time to try that out.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I would agree. I think there's no doubt this notion of software is eating the world, right? I think everything's moving to this digitized fashion. Even the brick and mortars, they've been forced to have e-commerce, and these drizzly, I'd like to say I don't know who they are, but I do. I fancy a drink every now and then, especially during these pandemic times. But one of the other things that I caution is I think a lot of folks, there's this contract tracing and things of that nature, which I think have benefit, but I'm seeing a lot of people not really understand or think about the long-term effects of these decisions, right? I think you have an interesting perspective because of your background, right? Solutions architecture, ERP, business critical systems, CIO, and then that security lens, which makes you a bit of a unicorn. Guidance to the folks on that will be consuming this as it relates to, as we're making decisions about technology advancements, and you hit on that. What should they consider in regards to, there's some threat actors out there. What should folks be considering as they digitally transform, how to mitigate cyber risk?
Right. So I think first and foremost, and you really need to look at it with a security first, security by design lens, right? With many disruptive technologies, even before the pandemic, it's often important for companies to get the product out quickly to the market, and security is an afterthought. Nowadays, with devices being more connected than ever, and more entryways for bad actors, you really need to take this into consideration. And it doesn't matter if you're a technology company, you might be exposed other ways. So you always need to look at, how can I keep my customers' data safe? We have all these data privacy regulation that hit the market. GDPR went live last year, and I think we're catching up in the United States on this too. So there's some really sensitive data that needs to be protected, and you don't want to be in the headlines of publications and pay enormous fines being caught in the middle of this. So you got to do the right thing, and I think it all starts with assessing your risks and looking at it from, what are some natural disasters that can hit us? What type of geographic redundancy do I need to have for my data center? If a pandemic like this hits, we have some, truly big lessons learned from the pandemic right now. But we had, companies being hit by supply chain disruption and cybersecurity incidents before. So, I think security has to be centered and built into the risk management framework to really tackle it and prioritize what are your highest risks and what are the most business critical systems and data assets that need to be protected.
Yeah, certainly. I think now more than ever, right? I was talking to someone who's a CEO of their company, and they made mention of this cost conscious, measure twice, cut once decisions. And so there'll be more scrutiny on the IT leadership to justify those expenditures, especially now during this pandemic and the loss of revenue and the economic recession that we're facing. But I don't think you can, at the same token, technology is also an enabler. But it goes back to making sure that you're addressing the downside risks associated with that upside potential, so that you're allocating resource and controls in that same way.
Right.
You have an interesting background in as it relates to maybe some consumer facing brands. Do you think the consumer has become desensitized to data breaches around their PII and things of that nature? And any thoughts on that? I just kind of curious of your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's in some ways it's probably a generational thing where if you're part of millennials or some of the generations that grew up leveraging applications, mobile applications, and they get value out of it. They understand that they're giving up some privacy and getting some value versus, if you're, progress through your life and career, you learn a lot of things, and you're a little bit more cautious, right? But I think everybody nowadays is taking some steps to giving up some information to get benefit out of it. So I think there's going to be that shift. But again, if you're caught in the middle of a breach, for example, from a consumer perspective, you have all these, you have banks that impacted, Equifax that got impacted, different retail stores that got impacted, and data that got exposed. So it certainly must make everybody that was impacted uncomfortable, right? And so I think it's a mixed bag of taking some calculated risks versus completely locking down.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was a great study. I was on a panel a couple of years ago about a consumer brand that it's very simplified their request for information in the consent. It was a children's toy manufacturer that said that they saw a huge increase in their membership club by tiering the information that was required to that next level. So if you only gave us or are comfortable with this level, this is what you get. It wasn't to restrict them. It was just based upon, this is why we're using this information and what you'll get out of it. It wasn't entitled you to any more. It just, they were very clear on it. And they, prior to that, they had I think the stat was like 15% of anybody that bought this product to, for the daughter, some little doll or something. And they were 15% membership subscription. And then post consent, it went up to about 45%. And they were fascinated by the fact that just clarifying their language and explaining to the parent why they were using this information of their minor and how they were doing it and what controls they had. I found it fascinating that privacy and consent language could have been a value driver. I think that's probably a unique scenario, but a scenario nonetheless, which I found very interesting. Right.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's some you mentioned earlier, kind of the traceability and monitoring from the pandemic right now that's going on, and there's a danger that you have all this technology that it helps you track and trace people, infected individuals, and helping protect the public as a result of that. Government agencies and companies need to be very careful that they're built in the privacy protection in that if you trace somebody that is infected and singled out, and you recommend to isolate, even from a cultural perspective, maybe that's okay in the United States, but in Asian countries that could be equal to losing a face, right? And so it's a different cultural stigma on things like that, and people need to be protected. So when you use the technology like thermal imaging, traceability, dashboards, and people need to make sure that the information, personal identifiable information, is taken out of the picture.
Yeah, I hope so. It scares me. This 1984 Big Brother scenario, the surveillance world, it scares me, and I don't think most of the general public are thinking about it. They're addressing the which can be related maybe to most organizations. They're playing whack-a-mole and addressing the problem in front of them instead of having a long-term strategy.
Right.
So for the sake of time and making sure this is consumable for our audience here, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Okay. One being, what can people do moving forward? Like we're playing whack-a-mole, we're reacting. Any thoughts on what folks can do to have a lens for maybe the strategic nature of building in resilience, or what should people be thinking about as they start to build their IT investments for what will become the new normal?
Right. So I think it's really taking in different data points, right? You have existing things that have happened, like I mentioned, besides virus pandemics, you have, natural disasters, you have cybersecurity incidents and other things that can disrupt you. So there are some risks that are out there, and, Harvard Business Review has written about this of, what you need to what companies do that come out strong out of recessions. And while you contain your costs, you need to be very careful, for example, that you don't drastically reduce your workforce. It's proven that companies that do that come out weaker out of a recession. And you also need to look at strategic investments that you can do right now in technology, in new capabilities, because as we all know, after this pandemic, I think this pandemic specifically has changed user behavior for good. So there are some impacts from shopping behavior to supply chain, where I think a lot of companies are nervous about having these global supply chains and bring producing and sourcing closer to home, right? And there's a whole plethora of impacts that I can see that can happen. But again, tying it back to kind of the risk management program, that's a good starting point to looking at what is in place, and then when for you're planning for potential pandemic that can happen, there will be you need to have key things in place, like a crisis management team, a crisis response plan, and then kind of a step-by-step process of analyzing where you are, where's the market, where's the industry, what are some of the cash conserving things that we can do, and then also what are some strategic investments that you can do, and then monitor, and react, because no pandemic or issue will all be the same, but you can do some things to be prepared.
Yeah, agreed. I totally agree. And if I could break that down into succinct points, keep me honest here. One would be sit down for IT professionals and security leadership, to sit down with the business now more than ever,
Mm-hmm.
gather the business requirements about what they need to do to support a couple of things. One was the people, right? The internal employees that they will keep on and that they will continue to be productive. The second is maybe where can we think about investment strategically to either, one, service our client needs better, or two, maybe innovate to bring new services to market based upon the shift of buying behavior.
Exactly.
Consumer, B2B, B2C.
Mm-hmm.
And the last piece I think I gathered was be very good at crisis management. This isn't the first or the last crisis that we'll face. So having that muscle memory and going through those exercises, we're in the middle of one now,
right.
But moving forward, making sure that we're continuously practicing different scenarios so that we can reiterate that resilience moving forward. Would that be a summation?
I think that's a great summary. And I think another important point to take is that, when you look historically at pandemics and recessions, there is, recessions are not forever. They're on average, 9 months to 1.5 years. And the recovery and the explosive growth phase after that is going to be somewhere from 9 to 15 years.
Right.
So, that's how it's important, because companies like Apple recognized that in the 2000 .com bubble bust, where, instead of, they had 33% declining revenue, but they invested 13% more into R&D. And as a result, they came out strong after the recession, introduced iTunes, iPod, and now they dominate the mobile space, right? And other capabilities. And similar stories for Amazon on how they always innovated throughout the recession and grew during the recession in 2009. So there's a lot of stories like that, and that's why it's really important while you see the things that are in front of you, you better also look at the long-term vision of, hey, we're going to get through this, and we got to be ready for explosive growth.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I can't wait for that day to happen. So Carsten, thank you very much for the time. Very insightful, very valuable feedback. Again, thanks for joining the Digital Resilience Series by Fellsway.
Great. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.